My parents tried to transfer my inheritance to their favorite daughter, but my grandparents noticed and prepared a surprise for them. After the reading of the will, my sister was furious and blamed everyone. Then, you decide to show up. Her voice was cold, devoid of the warm tones I remembered from my childhood. Grandma, what's going on? They told me you were in a nursing home. I murmured, trying to understand the situation. Her gaze, hard and distant, was almost like a physical blow. Your grandfather called you many times, she replied with a bitter tone. In his last breath, he called for you. He wanted to say goodbye to his little scientist, but you didn't even bother to answer his calls or visit him. How can you be so cold? Grandma, can you show me the number he was calling? I asked firmly. Please, I need to know what happened. Grandma left for a moment and came back with a small notepad. Her hands trembled as she showed me the number written in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. This isn't my number, I whispered, looking at the unfamiliar numbers. I've had the same number since high school. They gave you a false number, Grandma said, horrified. What do you mean by a false number? Grandma's severe expression began to crumble. Your parents said you changed your number when you went to university. They said you wanted to distance yourself from us, that you were too busy with your new life. The pieces started to fall into place. Grandma, I came here during the holidays. Maria was here, but she wouldn't let me in. She said the house was empty. Then, Mom and Dad told me you and Grandpa were in a nursing home. Grandma's face paled. A nursing home? Never. Maria and her parents told us you were so busy you didn't have time to visit. They said you were ashamed of us, that we weren't sophisticated enough for you. They said that. I felt my legs weaken. How could they? Grandma, they told me the funeral was at 2 p.m. When I got to the church, it was already over. They said I got the time wrong, but I never make mistakes about these things. The funeral was at 10 a.m., she said slowly, with understanding lighting up her eyes. Your parents stayed there and told everyone how disappointed they were that you didn't even bother to go to your grandfather's funeral. Maria even cried, saying she tried everything to contact you. I collapsed into her arms, and we both broke down in tears on the porch. All the pain, all the confusion, and all the distance that had been created between us dissolved as we embraced. Grandpa died believing I abandoned him. I sobbed on her shoulder, and Grandma stroked my hair, just like she used to when I was little. Her own tears fell. Now we know the truth. Now we know. After drying our tears, with a determined expression, her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed, but her voice was firm when she spoke. Sandra, it's me. I need you, Roberto, and Claudia to come here immediately. There are important documents we need to discuss. No, it can't wait. They'll be here in an hour, Grandma said, hanging up the phone. I said there were important documents to discuss. The lawyer is on his way too. When we heard the doorbell, Grandma squeezed my hand. Stay in the kitchen until I call you. I heard them entering, the laughter and social pleasantries from my mom, my dad's formal tone, my sister's bored sigh. Then, Grandma's voice sounded unusually cold. Please, everyone sit down. Mr. Morales came to read Samuel's will. That was my cue. I entered the room just as the lawyer began to open the envelope. Their expressions were unforgettable. My mom's practiced smile froze in place. My dad's face lost all color, and my sister's jaw dropped in shock. Mr. Morales cleared his throat and began reading. I, Samuel Rivas, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will. The room fell into complete silence, except for the sound of pages being turned. First came the house, which was left to Grandma, along with a substantial sum for her upkeep. Then came the surprise that made Claudia's face turn red with rage. The second seemed to drag on as the lawyer read each line of my grandfather's will. I, hidden in the corner of the room, watched their expressions twist on the faces of my family. My mom still held a frozen smile, trying to maintain appearances, but I knew she was boiling inside. My dad stared fixedly at the floor, his fists clenched. And my sister, Claudia, had an expression of hatred. Each line read felt like a blow they hadn't expected. The lawyer, Mr. Morales, maintained a firm and unshakable tone. He spoke about how my grandfather had always valued family and how disappointed he was to see the cold and selfish attitudes of his own children, those he had raised with so much love. Each sentence was an indictment they needed to hear, but I knew they wouldn't accept it quietly. I relived every lie they told me, every forced separation between me and my grandparents, while I wondered how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted when the lawyer began speaking about the division of assets. The tension in the room became almost palpable. My heart raced, a mix of anticipation and revolt. The lawyer explained that, in addition to the house and funds dedicated to Grandma's well-being, my grandfather had left the rest of the inheritance directly to me, with clear instructions that no one else would have access to anything. I could feel the air being sucked out of the room at that moment. My mom gasped, my sister seemed ready to explode, and my dad simply ran his hand over his face, as if trying to process the reality that had just crumbled before him. "This is ridiculous." Claudia finally exploded, her voice filled with indignation. "How is it that everything goes to her? I'm the favorite daughter. I've always been here. Why don't I get anything?" She looked at Grandma, expecting some kind of justification, but found only a cold gaze, devoid of any sympathy. Instead of responding to her, Grandma looked directly at me. "You can join us now, dear." I walked to the center of the room, and the look on their faces when they saw me standing right in front of them was unforgettable. It was as if they had been stabbed. My mom, eyes wide, started murmuring incomprehensible things, while my sister looked at me with a contempt I had never seen before. My dad stood up abruptly, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is unacceptable," he shouted, looking at the lawyer as if he could intimidate him. "We can't allow an ungrateful girl, who didn't even care about her grandfather, to receive everything." He didn't know what he was doing. He must have been sick, influenced by who knows what. I stepped forward and stared him down. Sick. He was perfectly lucid and conscious. The ones who were acting in bad faith here were you. You distanced me from him and Grandma with lies. You gave me a fake number, told me they were in a nursing home, and prevented me from seeing my grandfather on his deathbed. You destroyed our family for money, and now you're reaping what you sowed. My mom shook her head, tears streaming down her face, but I knew those tears weren't of regret. They were of frustration because they hadn't gotten what they wanted. She tried to approach me with that dramatic expression she used to manipulate everyone. "Daughter, you misunderstood everything. We only wanted what was best for you. We wanted to protect you from all the burden of taking care of the elderly." I let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the room. "Protect. You distanced me from them for pure self-interest. You wanted me to believe they didn't want me around, that I was a burden. You broke my heart, and in the process, you broke Grandpa's heart too." The silence that followed was broken only by my sister's heavy sighs as she was still processing the loss. She stared at the floor, eyes moist, but not with sadness. It was pure, raw anger. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" Claudia hissed, finally raising her head and glaring at me. "You always thought you were special, always the favorite. You don't deserve any of this, and one day you'll realize the mistake you're making by treating us this way." Grandma interrupted with a firm and cold voice. "Enough, Claudia. This is Enrique's will, his last wishes. You had your whole lives to show him even the slightest bit of respect and love, but you chose to act with contempt and greed. Now, you're just reaping the consequences." The lawyer, who had been silent until then, intervened. "I would like to remind everyone that this document is legally binding and unquestionable. If you try to contest it, you'll only be prolonging a lost battle." My mom let out a scream of frustration, and my dad tried to argue with the lawyer, but it was in vain. They were defeated, and the mask they had worked so hard to maintain was finally torn away. I saw my family in a way I'd never seen before. People broken by their own ambition, incapable of feeling anything genuine except hatred and envy. And in that moment, something inside me was freed. I looked at Grandma, who was looking at me with quiet pride, and I felt strong. For years, I had carried the pain of being distanced from my grandparents, the guilt of not being there in their final moments, but now I knew that guilt wasn't mine. I walked toward her, took her hand, and took a deep breath. "They can't hurt us anymore, Grandma. We're free." My sister snorted and ran out of the room, angrily pushing the chair aside. My parents tried to argue again, but I ignored them. I didn't need to hear anything else. The silence in the room seemed almost complete, except for the subtle rustling of papers as the lawyer gathered them into his folder. My parents and sister remained there, motionless, digesting the blow they had just received. My heart was pounding, not just because of the anger still consuming me, but because of a new determination that was starting to take shape. They had deprived me of precious moments with my grandfather, distanced me from my own family, and now they were there, empty and defenseless, in front of the consequences of their actions. I knew this moment couldn't end just with the reading of a will. Something more had to happen. "I'm going to need you to leave the house," I said, finally breaking the silence. My words sounded like a challenge. My mom raised her face, her eyes still filled with fake tears she was using as one last desperate attempt at manipulation. "Daughter, it doesn't have to be this way. We're your family, and you know we did all of this thinking of you," she started to murmur, as if expecting me to forget all the years of lies and manipulation. But something in me had changed. I was no longer the obedient daughter who accepted what I was told. I now understood what they had done, and there was no room for compassion anymore. "Thought about me?" I responded coldly. "You distanced me from my grandparents, stole the last moments I could have had with my grandfather, and now you want to act like none of this ever happened." My dad tried to intervene, adopting his paternal tone, the one he used to impose his authority. "You don't understand how much we sacrificed for you. We thought your life would be better away from these family problems." "Sacrificed for me?" My laugh was bitter and cutting. "You sacrificed my grandparents' love, you sacrificed my happiness, and all of that for what? So you could control everything, manipulate every last penny they had." My mom gave me a look that shifted between desperation and fury, but I didn't give room for any more arguments. "You have 1 week to vacate Grandma's house. She doesn't need traitorous, greedy people around her anymore." Their reaction was as I had imagined. My mom, seeing that words and emotional drama wouldn't save her, finally started to show her true face. "You'll pay for this," she hissed through clenched teeth. "We raised you, gave you everything, and now you think you can throw us out like we're strangers? I swear you'll regret this." I stared at her, maintaining my firm stance. "Regret? You broke my trust, deceived me, and used me and my grandparents. You are the ones who should be regretting. And maybe, in the end, regret won't be enough to fix what you've destroyed." I left the room and went up to the bedroom where I used to spend my summers as a child. Every corner of the house brought memories of happy moments I had shared with my grandparents. Every detail reminded me of the genuine love they had always shown. In that moment, I decided I would not allow my parents and sister to destroy what was left of their memory. While I was organizing some of my things in Grandma's, I realized she was standing there in the doorway, silently. Her gaze was sad but serene at the same time. It seemed that, after so many years of disappointment with her own children, she finally felt that everything was right. "They deserve what they're going through, dear," she murmured, walking over to me and placing a trembling hand on my shoulder. "Enrique and I always knew that your parents cared more about the money than about the love we had for you." I held her hand, trying to absorb all the strength and wisdom she still managed to transmit, even after everything she had been through. "I'll protect you, Grandma. I'll take care of everything so they can never hurt you again." In the days that followed, my determination only grew. I contacted the lawyer, took care of every detail, and made sure every instruction left by my grandfather was followed. We sent an official notice to my parents and sister, demanding they vacate the house within the stipulated time. To my surprise, they didn't try to contest it. Instead, they started sending me messages and emails, each one more desperate than the last. My mom pleaded, sending messages trying to awaken a shred of compassion in me. My dad, on the other hand, used veiled threats, talking about how family is forever and that no one escapes their own actions. Finally, on the day of the move, I went to the house to check if everything was being done as planned. When I arrived, I found my mom sitting on the stairs, her face swollen and covered in smeared makeup, a defeated version of the proud woman who always controlled everything around her. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. You really have no heart, do you? She said, her voice laced with venom. You're going to leave us with nothing? You're really going to leave your parents on the street? I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to respond with more bitterness. You chose this fate when you decided to betray your own father. I'm just giving you what you deserve. She laughed, a bitter and incredulous laugh, and stood up, approaching me with eyes burning with rage. You'll find out the hard way that what you did today will come back to you. I hugged Grandma and left with her, feeling that I had done the right thing. Months passed, and things began to stabilize. My grandma and I were fine, taking care of each other and building a life that my grandfather would be proud to see. As I learned, my parents were struggling financially, trying to survive without the money they had coveted for so long. And as for Claudia, I found out that she had tried to sue my grandmother to recover part of the inheritance, but the case was quickly dismissed. Deep down, I felt that I had finally put a period at the end of the sentence.